The Holy Land, home to the tomb of Christ in Jerusalem. This sacred, coveted land sparked 2 centuries of bloody struggle between the Western and the Eastern worlds, the Crusades. To survive in this increasingly hostile land, the Crusaders built ever larger, more formidable and robust castles.
The castles enabled the Crusaders as a minority to survive for 200 years.
We can say that they were substituting the personals with rock.
You see fortresses there that are of a size that's beyond comprehension compared to what we know.
Initially simple and effective, over the centuries the fortresses grew to defy the ever more deadly weapons of their attackers. The trebuchet, sapping, and Greek fire.
People looked at what the other side was doing. There's always a dialogue between attack and defense.
The solution to withstand these new weapons was to increase the size of the walls, as well as the height of the structures.
The powerful religious orders inhabiting these new castles could deflect the assaults of gigantic armies. These garrisons/fortresses earned their reputation for being impregnable, like Belvoir, a castle in the form of a labyrinth.
The right-angle turns were intentional. They obviously served as an additional obstacle.
And then you have to make a complete turn back, and then a 90-degree turn into the inner gateway where you have arrow slits on the sides.
And the Krak de Chevaliers, a legendary castle with indestructible walls.
They enclosed the 12th century castle with a much bigger 13th century castle with huge round towers.
You see more and more mural galleries, and this is creating more shooting places for defenders.
For 2 centuries, the Crusaders fortified their castles, building higher, thicker walls and digging ever deeper trenches.
By the time we get to the 13th century, there really aren't any small castles left.
To the point of protecting entire cities, such as Cesarea, in a strategic coastal location.
And the tower was 15 meters higher, so it was very impressive.
They built castles on the water, the last natural defense against all known weapons.
The sea is your fortification. Nobody can undermine the walls at Hatin, because if they do, they get drowned.
These megastructures are a testament to the military genius of the Crusaders. How did they build these fortresses that have survived the centuries? We're about to breach the walls and find out. At the end of the 11th century, Europe was fueled by religious fervor. The ultimate demonstration of faith was a pilgrimage to the Holy Land and the tomb of Christ, the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Built in 1071, the Turks seized the Holy City, and a few years later, forbade Christians from entering it. Exasperated, Pope Urban II spoke to an assembly of nobles and knights in Clermont-Ferrand. And what he said would change history forever.
Pope Urban II gives this grand speech calling on people to take up arms and effectively liberate, in his words, the churches of the Near East.
He seems to have encouraged knights from Western Europe, and especially from France, of course, to go out to the Middle East to take back for the Christians those places where Christ had lived and died during the course of his ministry. They felt strongly that this land should be ruled by Christians and not by Muslims. And the response to his preaching, the response to his sermon was enormous.
More than 100,000 warriors left for Jerusalem. This was the First Crusade. After 4 years of suffering and fighting, they arrived in front of the wall surrounding the Holy City. They conquered it in just 5 weeks. Mission accomplished.
The first intention of the Crusades was to occupy the holy places. The holy places included not only Jerusalem, but the entire Holy Land, since that was where Jesus lived. So the first thing they did was to fortify their lands.
So the castles were a particular solution of the Crusaders for their situation as a minority trying to survive in a region where they were encountering a lot of enemy activity.
They built within the lands they conquered, and so construction began on a colossal number of structures, including castles.
The Crusaders had to maintain control over a territory measuring 1,200 kilometers long and 300 kilometers wide, and defend it against the Muslims. They couldn't build structures covering the whole area, so the Crusaders initially focused on certain regions.
They had to occupy the coastal cities and use the ports to retain their contact with Europe. This was imperative.
The real primary goal is establishing connections along the coast. So capturing those port cities, which then establish links back with Europe, and you can have the movement of manpower, of money, of pilgrims, all of that flowing in, which helps provide the Kingdom of Jerusalem with the essence that it needs to survive.
One city in particular attracted their attention: Byblos on the Lebanese coast.
They settled in Byblos because it was a rich city near the sea. So they decided to build a fortification there.
In these tense times, the Crusaders had to build quickly. Byblos had an advantage. It was a 1,000-year-old city dotted with ancient temples, theaters, and castra. In order to accelerate the building process, the Crusaders used it as a stone quarry.
What we see quite a lot of in the Levant is the reuse of building materials. So many castles, they're often built either very near or in the middle of earlier ruins, because if you already have cut stones, you're saving a lot of work, a lot of time, and a lot of money.
The fortification in Byblos was built on top of the ruins left by the Romans and Byzantines, because everything they needed to build the castle was already there, such as stones and columns.
The castle was built entirely of reclaimed stone and stands facing the sea. At 45 meters wide and 50 meters long, it is a massive, impressive structure, one of the most prestigious in the Levant. The most impressive part is the tower rising 22 meters above the ground, an unusual height for the region. Why did the lord of the castle call for such a tall tower to be built?
The first thing he wanted to build was a symbol of his power in the West. What was the symbol of the Lord's power? The tower, of course.
So they built a donjon, which would have looked a bit familiar to the sort of donjon you might get in France or you might get in England at the time, except that it had stone vaults and some rather than wooden floors. The reason for this were really because there wasn't any wood, or there wasn't enough good wood.
While castles in the West had wooden frames, the Crusaders adapted their construction based on the materials available.
And I think this is one of the remarkable aspects of the Latin East and of the settlers, is that they were so able to adapt to the local conditions. And as wood was much more scarce, they learned the techniques of stone building and made use of it.
The Crusaders had another reason to build their castles out of stone, to protect themselves from Greek fire.
The people in the Middle East were very skilled at throwing flaming missiles, arrows covered with crude oil, naphtha, into buildings. So it was very important to make them fireproof. That technology didn't really exist in Western Europe because there isn't crude oil, there isn't the naphtha available. But in the Middle East it did. So you wanted stone vaults to stop them burning.
The Crusaders used a tried and tested technique, that of filled walls. It consists of erecting two walls out of finely cut stones, then filling the space between the two with fodder, which is to say rockfall and rubble, and pouring mortar on top to consolidate it all. This technique made it possible for them to build very thick walls in a very short amount of time.
They mastered the construction techniques and were able to build quickly because by using the same method everywhere, they could begin standardizing the production of rubble and move from one foundation to the next, ensuring the stability of every wall they built.
But stability wasn't enough in the face of a formidable military technique used by the Muslims: sapping.
The principle of mining, or sapping, undermining, involves digging under a wall. And then you prop this up with wooden posts. You then fill this cavity with combustibles, you set the whole thing on fire, that burns through the props, the wall above is left unsupported and comes crashing down. This is the best way, by far, to bring down a fortified wall during the medieval period.
It was the specialty of their adversaries, who had become experts in the technique.
How to better consolidate the walls? Once again, the Franks would find the answer amongst the ancient ruins.
Byblos was full of ancient columns. Still is, actually. There's still a lot left. And they weren't worried about demolishing them and bringing them and using them for that.
They took antique columns and placed them along the width of the walls, then added rubble and mortar, then another row of columns on top.
And they were simply much stronger because of the presence of these granite or marble columns running through them.
If part of the wall loses its support, it's still supported by the column because it's stuck into the rear face, so it helps the whole wall from falling down.
As a result, the walls of the castle were dotted with ancient columns. Once again, the Crusaders demonstrated their ability to adapt and change their building methods based on the materials available to them.
Putting columns inside the walls is a technique that existed since Muslim times. Muslims used a system called buttress columns, which were laid across to make the foundation more solid. You can see them protruding on each side. The Crusaders noticed this when they arrived.
People looked at what the other side was doing. There's always a dialogue between attack and defense, and each side found the same ways, really, of defending their castles against these attacks. So military technologies go across the religious frontier and the military frontier.
The Crusaders adapted to these new places, and for nearly 100 years, the Latin states developed and grew in the Holy Land in relative peace. Eventually, however, the situation deteriorated.
Starting in the 1170s, climate changed in the Middle East, moving from a state of armed peace to one of permanent threat.
Saladin, an Arab sultan, managed to unite all the Muslim forces and create a powerful army. He then declared a holy war against the Crusaders.
It is acknowledged once Egypt and Syria are united under Saladin in 1174, that the resources that can be brought against the Franks are enormous. They're far larger than they have been before. So to counter that, you're going to need larger castles, stronger castles, that can simply hold out longer, because the availability or the reliability of a relief army to come and rescue them is going down.
An army of monks would respond to this need. The Templars and the Hospitaliers. These religious orders possessed an unwavering faith, represented the military elite, and above all, had one major advantage over traditional knights: money.
Money is definitely the biggest difference. The military orders have enormously more resources at their disposal because they can rely on all of the finances that they draw from their estates back in Europe, all the donations they get from there. They funnel that money into the Near East, and they can use that to build castles.
It changed the context of fortifications. It changed everything, actually. All of a sudden, they went from what I would call artisanal fortifications to professional fortifications.
A perfect example of this new architecture is Belvoir Castle in the heart of the Jordan Valley. Today, only the bases of the walls remain, but we can guess at its complexity, power, and size.
It is an incredible castle in terms of how radical its design is.
It was the symbol of a new architectural style.
It's so almost perfect in its design and in its symmetry.
Belvoir's intricate design and its system of labyrinthine corridors made it a shining example in terms of fortifications.
It's almost perfect, with its towers flanking both sides of the fortress and its angles. It's really perfect.
It's a very massive military structure on a superb site overlooking the Jordan Valley.
To achieve such a feat, the Crusaders chose a strategic location. The castle was built on a base of solid lava, a stone called basalt, which was completely flat.
It's perfect for building castles. You don't need to dig foundations because there is rock underneath, so it's extremely stable.
The basalt base had another advantage.
This isn't a rocky spur, but rather a very flat area because of the basalt lava flow.
The architects had complete freedom. They were building on an almost entirely flat surface, so they were able to build an ideal plan, one without any limitations, as if they were building on a flat tabletop.
It's so perfect and it's so detailed that there must have been an architect or a group of architects who sat down and worked out exactly how the different parts were going to work and where each element should be and how they would work together.
The Crusaders designed a uniquely shaped castle with a system of double walls. An inner castle with an outer wall surrounding it.
It typifies the new sort of castle with massive, thick walls, and the walls within the walls, a sort of Russian doll of a castle, if you like, where you've got an inner courtyard and so on, and then the outer courtyard.
The Crusaders started by building the inner wall, with 4 towers at each corner. Then the second wall, which also had towers.
It was built very quickly. As we can see when we analyze the construction, it was not a particularly elegant castle. It was built with materials they found nearby.
In order to move quickly, the Crusaders dug into the basalt base to extract stones. At the same time, they dug a gigantic ditch more than 8 meters deep, all the way around the building. But basalt is a very hard rock, which is difficult to carve, and the Crusaders didn't have much time. They had to find a way to build the castle as quickly as possible without compromising on stability. How did they do it? The solution they chose can be found inside the walls they built.
What's interesting here is that we can see the raw blocks that were laid to form the base of the walls. They were extracted directly from the basalt columns outside. In these walls, the blocks are held together by a number of iron bars. Here you can see the iron bar holding the 2 blocks together, and there were 2 pins anchored deep inside the massive blocks.
Iron staples were attached to the stone and sealed with lead, a technique used in building cathedrals. The basalt stones were stapled together 2 by 2 throughout the castle.
The staples were used because the stones weren't very well cut, so they wouldn't really hold together on their own. The castle was built very quickly, and analysis shows that the mortar was very bad quality, so the builders used these staples to build the walls and ensure they would hold.
But they didn't stop there. The Crusaders also used iron staples in the arrow slits, the openings through which archers would shoot their arrows.
You can see it very well here. It's very well preserved. These staples were used to attach the blocks to one another during construction. Here, the spacing from when the upper blocks were put into position was preserved.
The Crusaders placed iron bars on all the arrow slits. Iron was also used between the stones. The Crusaders used it to calibrate the spacing between the stones, especially on the corners of the walls, which had to be very precise. There are several tons of iron found throughout the castle, yet there was no trace of iron in the area. Why did they choose to use this material?
There was a huge lack of iron in the area. In order to develop iron metallurgy, they had to engage in trade at various distances.
The cost of iron was extremely high, but they still decided to use it rather than carving the blocks more precisely. But this was still a castle and a defense construction, so they focused on what mattered most, building masonry that was sturdy and could be erected as quickly as possible so they could get the castle built.
Belvoir faces the valley. The impressive castle was a way for the Hospitaliers to assert their presence in the region. But a major event was about to change the history of the Crusades.
So, what changes in July 1187 is the army of Jerusalem, for the first time in a decade, really, decides to actually engage Saladin's army.
The new king of Jerusalem, Guy de Lusignan, who had just arrived from Europe, decided to gather all the knights, the Templars, and the Hospitaliers present in the Holy Land to fight Saladin's gigantic army and put an end to it once and for all.
The king was a new king who'd just come from Western Europe. He wasn't experienced with at least some background.
The sworn enemies faced one another on the plains of Hatin, a few kilometers from Belvoir.
And the king made classic military mistakes of not making sure that he was close to the water supply.
The Crusader soldiers, parched with thirst and suffering from the heat, were no match for Saladin's army.
But the event is a complete defeat for the Frankish side. The army of Jerusalem is almost entirely destroyed.
All the Christian knights, or at least 70% of them, were decimated in one fell swoop. That's what Hatin changed.
Because the entire army had been brought to this battle, the other cities and fortifications throughout the countryside were left undefended. So it was fairly easy pickings for Saladin after the Battle of Hatin, and to bring about almost the entire collapse of the Frankish presence in the Holy Land.
Belvoir, the castle reputed to be impregnable, was still standing, and Saladin decided to attack it with his entire army. But it had been designed precisely to keep potential attackers out.
This very complex means of reaching the inner castle from the outer castle. You have the main gateway of Belvoir, which is in the southeast. You go through an outer gateway into a passage, and then you have to make a complete turn back. And then a 90-degree turn into the inner gateway where you have arrow slits on the sides. And then if you manage to get through that and you break through the inner gateway, you're in the outer courtyard. And if you want to reach the inner castle, you have to go all the way around, all the time under fire. And then once again, you have a gate system at the inner castle. So it's a very, very complex system.
The Hospitaliers had designed an entrance at a right angle that forced attackers to slow down once they had gone through the tower door.
It's better if potential attackers cannot enter or charge the door head-on. So they designed it to be perpendicular rather than along the same axis.
There's an angled entrance, and that entrance is the most important one of the inner castle.
Angled entries have existed since around the 1170s. They're clearly a Muslim invention. The first one were used in Cairo under Saladin, and they spread from there.
The castle seemed impenetrable, and Saladin changed his mind. He decided to lay siege to it instead. But the Crusaders had everything they needed to withstand a lengthy siege, in particular water reserves.
In the entire course of the history of the Crusades, no Crusader castle ever surrendered because they ran out of water.
In those regions, it rains a lot, even in the spring. So they collected all the water during the rainy season to be used throughout the year.
The roof retained the water, and it was guided into pipes, ceramic pipes, which carried it down into the cisterns underneath the castle.
The ducts are still visible, and the cisterns have been preserved. The Hospitaliers could last a very long time with their supply of water and food. Months went by, and the castle didn't surrender. To Saladin's army, it seemed impregnable.
What we see at Belvoir is, first and foremost, thick walls, lots of embrasures, and the very regular and logical spacing of towers. So this, to me, is as much about preventing undermining and frontal attacks as anything else, because it's built right on the basalt bedrock, so it's very hard to undermine, and all of the embrasures that you see help to keep attackers back from the walls.
But Saladin didn't give up. He decided to attempt to undermine the south wall, even though the 10-foot-high ditch surrounding the castle made it difficult work. It took Saladin's army months to dig through the extremely hard basalt rock.
How long did they stay? How long did they resist? We know from the text that it was more than a year. If they were besieged for a year, it shows that the castle was very strong.
The outer wall eventually collapsed, and the Hospitaliers surrendered. Belvoir fell to Saladin in 1189. The Crusaders lost ground, and a new era of Crusades began. The powerful religious orders took up more and more space. Only a few large fortifications remained, including one that marked the Crusades of the 13th century, the Krak des Chevaliers. This iconic castle dominates the Syrian plains, facing what's called the Om's Gap, a historic pass connecting the mountains of Lebanon and the Mediterranean coast. It was built more than 1,000 years ago, and its extraordinary size, location, and unique shape made it a key element of the Crusades. For more than a century, the Hospitaliers, who controlled the land, transformed it into a massive construction site and made it impregnable. But the legendary story began with a terrible disaster.
In 1170, there was a huge earthquake, which changed everything.
It was documented. It was one of the strongest earthquakes of the Middle Ages in the Middle East, and it probably destroyed almost everything.
After this big earthquake, the order decided that they want to do something brand new.
They built a polygonal castle, flanked by towers, and other buildings were constructed all around the inner courtyard, where the Hospitalier brothers lived.
The Krak is built on the slopes of a mountain. To the north, from east to west, it is protected by the steep terrain. To the south, the mountain is slightly higher than it, so the Hospitaliers placed 3 rectangular towers to improve its defense. This new barracks castle met all the needs of the soldier monks.
When the orders built these large fortresses, they were designed for soldiers, religious people, and civilians to cohabitate. So that was obviously a huge change.
Would it be enough to protect it from potential attackers? At the beginning of the 13th century, the situation was increasingly tense.
Europe started to lose its interest in the Crusades, and less help was to be expected from Europe. So the local Franks living here since like 3 or 4 generations had to rely on fortifications. To compensate for their lack of manpower, they had to build more strong and more fortified castles. We can say that they were substituting the personals with rock.
They needed to be able to withstand more powerful armies, with more powerful weapons and more soldiers that were able to attack on all flanks at once.
In addition, a new weapon had just made its appearance on the scene, the counterweight trebuchet. It was a kind of catapult that used a counterweight to send cannonballs weighing more than 100 kilograms over distances greater than 200 meters, more accurately than ever before.
If you were not changing the size of the ball, you could always hit exactly the same position which you hit before. And you could have a much better aiming, you could plan your bombing strategy more effective, and you can make more precise and continuous destruction on the same point.
These were much more devastating for castles. There is a revolution in offensive technology, shall we say. And after that, only very sophisticated and well-developed castles can survive that sort of attack.
The Hospitaliers were determined to strengthen their fortress to respond to these new forms of attack. To succeed, they had to completely rethink the Krak des Chevaliers.
They enclosed the 12th century castle with a much bigger 13th century castle. So the 12th century fortress was still there. They didn't demolish it. They just built an outer skin, so to speak, an outer layer of defense to surround it.
The interior castle got a coating, a new coat from the south and from the west in the form of a huge sloping wall.
The Crusaders built the new wall to form a glacis. In other words, a sloping wall. This significantly improved their defense.
A glacis is simply a mattress of stones built on rock. The rock is regularized in such a way that it makes climbing it extremely difficult. Then, a ditch is dug in front of the wall to make it even taller. It's absolutely extraordinary.
The glacis also helped to protect against sapping, which was very common at the time.
If you are having a huge talus supporting your tower and your wall, then it's practically impossible to undermine because you cannot make a hole big enough to collapse all this quantity of material.
This glacis was also used to support gigantic semicircular towers more than 15 meters high. The Crusaders placed them directly on top of the old towers, which served as a foundation. Most castle towers were rectangular because they were easier to build. Why did they choose such a difficult shape?
Rounded towers are kind of a new option, though, and you often see them with smooth masonry, so really to accentuate the curve of the tower. But this is something new.
And rounded towers were just much better withstanding the projectiles because the rounded forms, they could divert and not hit directly.
The glacis and semicircular towers made the wall impregnable. The Crusaders knew it, so they used them on the most vulnerable sides, including the one facing the plateau, which was easier to attack. The final result was impressive and unique in the Middle East.
The glacis on the north face wasn't built as carefully as the large glacis on the attack face. So, it was really there primarily to impress attackers.
So those stones were cut in a way that the tower just rises out of the glacis with no seams. That in itself would have involved some pretty fantastic architecture and masonry.
It's quite exceptional, and what it demonstrates is a new kind of expertise, a new way of approaching the design of fortresses.
With its half-round towers and glacis, the Krak became famous throughout the East and earned a reputation as being impenetrable, especially since the Hospitaliers had a surprise in store should a potential attacker ever reach the walls.
The glacis is not just a lump of stone, it's actually hollow inside. I mean, there are passages, there are arrow slits, and so on.
They built galleries with arrow slits in them, so the archers could shoot outwards from them.
Inside the glacis, 2-meter-wide galleries along the entire length allowed archers to attack anyone who tried to climb or undermine the wall. The Hospitaliers created an impressive second line of defense, which followed the terrain and surrounded the inner castle.
The outer line of wall was also supplied with these half-rounded towers to make it more effective against the attack, and that's what makes the Krak des Chevaliers one of the most impressive concentric castles of the age.
The strategic importance of this is that if that outer castle is captured, those in the interior castle still have an opportunity to basically negotiate a surrender.
Everything was designed to keep attackers from getting in, even the angled entrance, which was pushed to the extreme so that anyone coming through the door would have to turn 180 degrees and walk along a long sloping corridor dotted with arrow slits and holes through which the occupants could throw stones.
It's all of those elements kind of being brought together. And so you can see a culmination of certain advancements made in certain places, all being brought together to try and put them to greatest effect.
Safe inside the walls, the Hospitaliers built a large room 28 meters long. They added a chapel, an ambulatory, and kitchens. In the 13th century, more than 3,000 people lived inside these walls. Therefore, the monks had to get creative when it came to water management. Azem Ana and his team have unearthed a unique, extremely complex, and sophisticated water distribution network never before seen in a fortress. It allowed the Krak des Chevaliers to be completely autonomous in terms of water.
We started in 2017. We made our excavation, and we were very surprised because we discovered a lot of non-known canals before. So we can recognize three types of cistern, let's say, or three types of water according to its use: white water, gray water, and black water or sewage water.
The source was white water. The Hospitaliers developed a formidable rainwater collection system. Numerous cisterns were installed throughout the castle to store the water. The biggest was found in the kitchen.
The most problem for them, as I think at that time, that they have to prepare food every day for 3,000 persons. They need a lot of water. They need a lot of water to cook, to clean the dishes, to drink also. So inside the kitchen, we have the biggest system for drinking water or white water in the Krak. They can store there about 600 cubic meters of water. So it's a huge quantity.
Once the water was used, it entered the gray water system, where it would serve a second purpose.
There was a system of latrines. There were a few around the castle, but in particular, there was one place with 12 latrines together, and another tower containing 12 more latrines.
And then it's become dirty water, which we call black water. This one should be directly through outside the citadel.
The Krak des Chevaliers dominated the valley. No Muslim army dared to attack it. But meanwhile in Europe, a new crusade was brewing. In 1248, 25,000 men left the new port of Aigues-Mortes in France, with Saint Louis in charge. His plan was to consolidate the Crusaders' presence in the Holy Land, starting by securing the port cities, especially Cesarea.
Saint Louis thought that his project in the Crusader states was going to be the beginning of a great new Crusader movement and so on, because he believed passionately in these things. What Saint Louis wanted to do, I think, was to make the port into a major military base for supplying the Franks from Western Europe. Big-scale military planning.
When Saint Louis arrived, the Muslim enclosure of the city was in ruins. In less than 2 years, the Crusaders had built one of the most powerful fortifications in the region.
It's almost 900 meters of fortification with 16 towers. It's really one of the best examples that we know of medieval military fortification. Reinforced with the towers and glacis surrounded by moat and counterscape. It was a formidable fortified city.
How did they do it? What made the walls of Cesarea so effective at protecting the city?
The wall of Cesarea was absolutely extraordinary, and it was only made possible by the money given to St. Louis for the Crusades. It's important to keep in mind that the Crusades cost the kingdom £1,500,000. It was a considerable sum of money that could be counted in billions, so they had plenty of money for building. They also probably used slave labor to build the wall.
The Crusaders were focused on just one thing: protecting the city as quickly as possible. In order to do that, they salvaged already cut stones from an ancient site nearby. Then they used the filled wall technique, which allowed them to work quickly and build thick walls. They built no fewer than 16 towers, all square.
For St. Louis, making square towers was strange because everything he built in France, everything that was built during his reign, whether in Angers or Carcassonne, had circular towers. But in the Middle East, the most important thing was to move quickly. I don't think he cared if the towers were rectangular or circular. What mattered to him was that there were towers and that those towers would be able to defend themselves. That's all he cared about.
The towers were more than 15 meters high and were placed with care.
The towers are at regular intervals and so on. And it is clearly an example of central military planning.
The spaces between the towers are ideal for distance of firing arrows from tower to tower, because these projecting towers were a means of enabling you to defend the exterior of the fortification. If you don't have projecting towers and you just have a sort of straight line, then from the arrow slits off the top of the walls, you find it very difficult to defend the base of the wall. But if you have a tower projecting from the arrow slits on the sides of the tower, you can defend the length of the wall.
Inside the wall, the Crusaders placed galleries and dozens of arrow slits through which arrows could be fired. The wall was built in just 4 months, an incredible feat. But the Crusaders didn't stop there. They also dug a gigantic ditch.
You have to imagine that when St. Louis first arrived in Cesarea, there were no ditches. He dug ditches about 20 meters deep, resulting in very high walls.
They dug down as near as possible to the water level. It's also gained the additional protection for the city. I mean, if you try to dig the mine beneath the fortification, the water start pouring within the tunnels, and it's make it almost impossible to mine the city.
Finally, they built a glacis more than 10 meters high. All the way to the sea, the city was completely surrounded by this impressive wall, which sprang out of the ground in record time.
So this wall is a great example of development. So the main elements here are, again, the talus, which is a defense against frontal assaults, as well as probably against undermining. And the embrasures, the loopholes, are again a means of fighting off frontal attacks. So it's mining, it's frontal attacks. It's the same 2 main foci that we see from the time of Saladin onward.
Finally, the Crusaders built the famous angled entrances to prevent enemies from getting inside easily. At the foot of the towers, they also placed discreet doors called posterns. What purpose did they serve?
Posterns were emergency doors. That's what they were often called. They weren't so much to flee in case of trouble, but rather to go down into the ditches, away from attackers, to try to surprise them from behind, for example.
But they're also a weak point in the defenses because they're exposed. So they have, like many aspects of military architecture, they have advantages and they have disadvantages.
Concealed doors and angled entrances were some of the techniques that allowed the besieged to attack the besiegers.
That was one of the evolutions of fortresses between the 12th and 13th centuries. The biggest change was the introduction of active defense. Active defense means they weren't just hiding behind a wall, waiting for the attack to be over.
It's much more to do with constantly putting pressure on the attackers, so they can't relax, they can't build up their siege engines, they can't get down to the undermining and so on, because the defenders will be firing on them and making sorties and coming out, and that to attack them, and that is what really active defense is about.
After more than 150 years of war, the military genius of the Crusades was reflected in every inch of the wall of Cesarea. Saint Louis wanted to be sure he would never lose the city.
And finally, you might call me cynical, but all of it was useless.
Because the Crusaders had to face a terrible enemy, Belvoir, a Muslim sultan who managed to assemble a gigantic professional army.
Belvoir has a very large army. It is the number of people that are involved, and it's the amount of resources that are required to finance and support all those people. So it's not necessarily that you have a great development in, let's say, something like undermining. But if all of a sudden you increase the number of underminers or sappers at your disposal by a factor of 10, that's a huge development.
And Belvoir, who was the great master of siege engines and siege warfare, to set up the catapults and so on, that made it impossible to defend the castle anymore.
The wall of Cesarea didn't withstand the assault, and the Crusaders behind the walls didn't even try to fight.
When Belvoir showed up in 1265, there weren't enough people to defend the castle. And as Belvoir once said to a Frankish lord, "You can build all the fortifications you want, but you can't hold a territory with stones."
The Crusaders fled the enclosure, which wasn't even put to the test. The collapse of what remained of the Crusader lands began, and Belvoir decided to tackle another renowned castle, the Krak de Chevaliers.
This is what happened in 1271. Belvoir had siege engines that allowed him to shoot from the village he had conquered, from 200 to 250 meters away, which is considerable. He used large cannonballs to destroy the entire northern front.
And in fact, it surrendered by agreement. It wasn't taken by assault, it wasn't taken by force. The outer walls were battered down on that side. The people in the garrison knew that there was no reinforcements, nobody was going to come and help them. They just made a deal. They said, okay, you let us in peace and more. And it's the same with so many of these castles. People realized they simply couldn't be defended anymore.
After just 19 days of siege, the Krak de Chevaliers, reputed as being impregnable, fell to Belvoir, and the Crusaders fled once again. The Holy Land seemed lost, but some fortified sites on the coast still remained, including Tyre, Acre, and the city of Sidon, which was home to another castle that seemed to be impregnable. Was it really the case, or would it too fall to the Muslims? Sidon, a castle built on an island surrounded by water. This impressive fortress, whose walls were dotted with ancient columns, seemed to defy all attackers. It was one of the last pieces of land held by the Crusaders.
It's a very effective means of defending the castle by making use of the sea. In some ways, it's like the same idea as the hilltop castles, where you have the steep topography is defending the castle. So in the case of Sidon, it's the water surrounding it. So you have to, it makes it difficult to approach, and if you approach it, you certainly can't undermine.
It is very clearly the last line of defense. Focus tends to get more and more concentrated just on the citadels, because it's focusing all that wealth on the very last place that's going to hold out.
To enter the castle, you had to walk along the long bridge leading to the only gate. It was protected with a double portcullis system to block the entrance. And if the assailants tried to attack, a series of machicolations awaited them.
A machicolation is a stone projection on corbels that extends beyond the wall, so that people inside the machicolation can fire down through the floors at people attacking. Become very important in castles after the year 1200. And something that is very interesting about this is that these castles, these box machicolations, start being used in Crusader castles and exactly the same time in Muslim castles.
So the use of these starting in the early 13th century becomes very common because they're very effective. And in Hollywood, they like to drop boiling oil and stuff down there. Far too expensive, they're not gonna do that. Boiling water works just the same. Rocks and arrows work even better. But what you do see, machicolations are one of those elements that you can see very clearly. They respond to a very specific threat, and it's all about keeping people away from the base of your walls.
That was the extent of the castle's defenses. The Templars were confident in the protection offered by the sea.
I think the builders of Sidon didn't believe it would be attacked from the land because it stands in the sea. So you don't have to have different layers of fortifications. You don't have to remote dug and ditches dug and so on, because the sea does that for you.
Unassailable by land and impregnable by sea, Sidon Castle became a place of refuge. But unfortunately, it would meet the same fate of the other Crusader castles.
End of the story, as so often, when the city of Acre fell to the Muslims in 1291, that was a very hard battle. The rest of them gave up completely peacefully, as far as we know.
They recognize they can't hold out, so why bother? Why not just surrender on our own terms, which means taking everything you can with you at your own pace?
The number of castles that were actually taken by military action it was very small. Mostly the damage was done, the people realized they had to surrender because there was no hope of carrying on.
Without even fighting, the Crusaders left this last piece of the Holy Land, never to return. All the castles were taken over by the Muslims, Byblos, Belvoir, which was completely dismantled to prevent the Crusaders from returning, the Krak de Chevaliers, and the city of Cesarea. 200 years of alternating between war and a precarious peace left a lasting imprint on the Holy Lands. These impressive castles, which testified to the Crusaders' military genius. These superstructures which proved to be impregnable after all.
I think the castles were, to a large degree, a success story, and I think that the failure of the Crusader entity, if you like, in the long run, was not because of the failure of the castles. I think they did succeed in allowing the Crusaders of the Franks to survive in the Latin East for a remarkably long time.
None of these constructions failed. Even today, they have resisted the throes of time to continue to bear witness, 1,000 years later, to the dark chapter in history known as the Crusades.